Our next speaker, David Banger, is an adjunct professor, author and advisor, and he's an internationally recognised innovator. He's a thinker and a pragmatist. His expertise lies in offering unique and succinct insights that enable organisations and their people to realise their technology and digital potential. Now, David is going to give us a ladder of steps working backwards with you and your organisation's mindset, particularly on how to get your hands dirty. But I'll leave it up to David to explain just what that means. David, thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Whether it's data or whether it's content online, understand where your customers are interacting. Where they're interacting is where they actually have value. You need to understand that. And then how can you qualify that value to enable them to transact on it, which is the next step of digital. So if you just apply this to the Amazon model, Amazon identified that books was probably going to be a bit of a hit. People started to interact with the books. You can actually proofread a book. My book's on Amazon, by the way. And then they can actually, if they want to, transact on that book. They set up an ecosystem off the back of that, a technical platform to support it. I see a lot of organisations saying we need to have a digital platform, and then we're going to understand the market, and then we're going to take a product to the market. Don't start there. Start with the content and where people are going to interact and what people value. Because what you think they may value and what they actually will are different. Those people who are leading organisations who began their career pre-internet. We've got people working in organisations who've worked for the majority of their career within the internet. And then we've got 40% of our customers in 2020, next year, who only know the world of the internet. That we need to move from a state of transformation, constantly thinking about doing things to an organisation, but to create an environment of transition within it. Is a very big difference to create an environment of transition within an organisation as opposed to a transformation of doing something to an organisation. If there's one thing that you choose to do in the first step of your digital journey, is actually go back to your organisation and have the conversation with your teams about the type of work they're doing. Why? Because we keep on overlaying technology solutions so people can increase their output. We have to stop thinking that if we move to Agile, if we increase these technology solutions, we can actually increase the output. It's important, and it's an important part, but we actually have to get to one of the root causes of the symptoms of our business. And that is the amount of activities as a result of responsibilities in job descriptions. And I used to write them for 20 years. I loved it. You put in any additional responsibilities. I can get this person to do anything I want them to do. It's awesome. But we have to shift our mindset, and we have to shift some of our reward mechanisms to actually look at the value of the work. And the first piece of the value of the work that you can actually do within your organisation is to actually ask your people to rationalise the things that they're doing, to try and eliminate them. If they can't be eliminated, can they be automated or integrated? The demands are only going to increase, and the probability of the delivery of those special projects actually decrease based on some statistics. The work within your organisation is probably not going to be relevant in the next decade. And you need to understand how to innovate. And I dread using that word innovate. I dread putting it into my book. But when I speak to executives and I explain to them that not everybody in your organisation is going to be an innovator, they get it. And in actual fact, within your organisation, where do you ask the majority of your people to innovate? We're going to set up a value. We're going to communicate that to our population around innovation. And it just alienates everybody because we start asking them for something rather than enabling them. And really there's different circumstances that we can actually have people step in and innovate within. And many employees will need to be involved in the digital world with tactical innovation. I'd expect suggestions from almost all employees around how they improve their work in the digital world that we're entering. but we want to provide those suggestions based on the problems that we have today so we don't take them into the future. Tactical innovation across many employees, this is what we should probably be asking them to look at. Just start at simplifying the tasks. Eliminate, then automate. Process, standardise. What is best practice across your enterprise? The reason that Uber was so successful initially is because there was so many fragmented local taxi customer processes. They solved a problem with a standard process. Intelligent data capture. And I meet a lot of organisations who tell me the volume of data they have, but they don't nearly enough talk about the insights they glean from that data. Encourage a diversity of thought. Review your talent within your organisation and recruit some people that are external to this country, that have actually had potentially an environment of scarcity, where they've become educated and have had to think about problems in a different way. Think about how you can actually strive with greater diversity with flexibility. Now, this is different to the earlier one, and what I mean by that is thinking about looking at remote working as being an enabler rather than a benefit within your organisation. We think of the shallow work and the deep work that was mentioned earlier in today. Deep work is often done in a remote location. How much are your people thinking? How are your policies enabling that to do that? Ideas must be combined with business skills. That's why that solo explorer doesn't often get things off the ground. Have you got the right teams that are commercially savvy to do this? If you look at Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb, there was 23 versions of the light bulb before he actually invented it. He commercialised the light bulb. He didn't invent it, he commercialised the light bulb. And we know that innovation actually requires a collective community. At Tesla, since their vision has remained the same, what it was 12 years ago, which is the inception of being a sustainable electronic vehicle for the mass market. And they've been really committed to the outcome. And they've had incremental steps. And I want you to think about this. If there's one thing you think about innovating in the digital world, think about initially going to market with a low volume product and a high margin. Low volume product and a high margin. Find a market who will pay for that. There may be only a select group of people, but think about that. And that's the Tesla Roadster, the first Tesla product. Probably nobody in this room bought it, but they did have a group of people that did 10 or 12 years ago. Then there's a second step, which is something that's mid-market. A higher volume model by taking the learnings from that experimental model in many ways and probably having higher volumes in sales with a little bit reduced margin. And Elon Musk talks about this, and he talks about it being the Model S. And then something happened when they set their vision about 10 or 12 years ago. There was a big move to families buying SUVs. And he said, we entered 2.5 in our plan, which is the SUV version in stage 2. And then he moved to stage 3, which is the Model 3. Understand what type of CIO you have. There's 3 types. At one organisation, I met many CIOs across Europe for about 4 or 5 years. There's a technical CIO that love talking to you about the data centre. Your eyes sort of glaze over after about a minute or two. I'm not going to ask you to put your hands up, but I can see people smiling. You know exactly who I'm talking about. And you know that actually giving them a business problem, it's going to be a stretch beyond. There's also the technical person that's been burnt by a couple of bad projects and want to outsource the risk to somebody else. And they're now a procurement specialist. And guess what? They've got your little vendor community working to a box. And anything you want to do digitally is going to be a change request. What does that equal? Expensive. Or you have a business CIO who actually wants to understand your business strategy, align a technical strategy to support that, and then facilitate groups working on these things in a digital way. And Swinburne, where I do a lot of my pro bono work at, have done some research that we now as a community trust strangers more than we trust our leaders. the people that we ride share with, we let complete strangers stay in our house. But we feel more fondly about them, and we'll give them a higher score than what we would on that mobile app than what we would some of our politicians or people leading our large corporate organisations. A construction organisation is thinking of doing something radical with unsolicited proposals to the government. And they believe they could partner with Uber to do that. Sounds quite cool, doesn't it? You know, get Uber, get some startup capability, got some great data, real-time data. What I said is potentially you're actually you're giving up your IP around the tendering process, the engineering and design process, just to actually give up that data. And you need to really think about those partnerships, because if Uber wanted to, 12, 24 months after they enter that relationship, they understand your process. But you don't have all their data because they won't give it to you. And therefore, you've just actually built a new competitor, a new entry into your market.